Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Artemis Fowl. Artemis Fowl is not a good movie. I think that's obvious to almost anyone who's seen it or generally got a whiff of its stench. It is sort of not the worst movie of the year. That's still probably Doolittle. It's not so bad it's good. It's not even so bad it's bad. It's just sort of there in its natural YA adaptationness, but it does still have Josh Gad unhinging his jaw, eating lots of sand, and then having the sand come out of his butt. So it does have that, but the whole movie isn't like butt sand. Just to be clear, there's other things to be bored with other than butt sand in this movie. I've never read the books or the book that this one is specifically based on. I've kind of heard what the book is about, and it looks like they kind of changed it to make it crappier, and that this was sort of more of a, people say it was more like Die Hard. I would argue, in effect, wouldn't this really be Home Alone? Because Home Alone's sort of a version of Die Hard, but whatever. And I think that gets to the major problem with this movie, is that it sort of is a YA adaptation first, in that sort of YA adaptation genre, more than it's trying to make a good movie out of the story. Now, I feel like most of the YA adaptation, you have these big books and you make them into a movie, and some of them become Harry Potter or Hunger Games, and others become like whatever that Cirque du Freak was, like the one with the guy from Solo in it, Divergent. Yeah, it's like Divergent, sure. Divergent's like code for the crappier ones. They kind of have to explain the whole stupid world and gotta go, these things are groggy logs. And they're like, oh, the groggy logs have been mysteriously hidden this whole fucking time or some dumb bullshit. And that's like all these movies, basically. And they did that, but it's with fairies and Irish folklore. And it really wants to sell that to you. It really wants to sell the idea of Irish folklore through this movie. And it sort of doesn't really do that because it's doing it so much in this dumb YA thing. It's like the typical studio big blockbustery kind of thing, and it just never takes itself away from that. To have this movie directed in a way that's not just sort of like how a normal studio director was given a paint by numbers kind of a deal to how to make this, and didn't really paint the right colors in the right number boxes. And Kenneth Branagh, I know he used to be a director that people took very seriously, and it seems like a lot of that has not gone away for some reason, despite the fact of having a decade of basically work for hire gigs. If we're really being honest, most of which is really not that great. And even in that oeuvre of his recent crapdom, I would say this is more Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit than it is like Cinderella, which I didn't even like, but is probably the best of all these that he's made since Thor, and including Thor. This is kind of bottom tier for him. Now, I am not that well versed in Kenneth Branagh's filmography. I saw his 90s Hamlet, which I quite liked, and I haven't seen a lot of his 80s stuff, but I do get the impression that he was kind of an interesting director at one time. I do not get that from this movie. I get that he is a guy who is basically a work for hire guy. He got put to a certain echelon director when he did Thor, and he just wants to stay there and kind of like does these sort of paycheck movies now and then. It seems like Murder on the Orient Express, he genuinely wanted to do. Was it good? Fuck no. But he did it. When you think of a director who's definitely past their prime and they're also doing a work for hire gig, it's like you already don't care enough. You don't even have the gumption to make something you care about work. What if you made something you sort of don't care about? Oh, you won't get that to work. Never mind. Forget what I was saying. So Artemis Fowl is basically not handled by the best people because it's, first off, not directed by anyone who in any way sort of gives a shit. He might have given a shit before. He's like, I want to tell Irish folklore, which, by the way, why didn't you just do a cartoon saloon movie? Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea are excellent and do that very well and teach kids that folklore in a very organic way. This is pandering and stupid and the kind of normal dumb blockbustery crap that makes kids go, fairies, I really don't care anymore. I had to sit through this junk. And it was clearly recut because you Google this movie, the length is an hour and 50 minutes, where it says like the length and the director on the side on Google there. And then if you look on the Wikipedia, or Wikipedia as I like to say, is it's noticeably shorter. Or if you go to Disney Plus where you can watch it, there are so many scenes in this where they're reestablishing things. Like, it's either they don't have enough faith in you to pay attention to this movie, that honestly, I mean, I give them credit for that, because why would you pay attention? It's not very good. Where they're reinstating facts so many times just so you're like super clear on things. Like, you established that Colin Farrell is his dad in this movie. This is part of the, I guess I'll talk about the plot or whatever. The plot is like, he has his dad Colin Farrell, and his dad is jailed because you find out he's a master thief. He's watching the TV, and you've seen him in the movie that you're watching. If you're watching this movie, which you shouldn't, you see him with his dad, and they say, hey, that's his dad, and they're walking, his dad's teaching him stuff, and they say it like a bunch. Like, you get that it's his dad. You don't really need any reminders. Then you watch it on TV, and instead of like just dropping his cereal bowl and like having like a kind of thing, and we get it, blah blah, he just keeps saying, hey, that's my dad on the TV getting arrested. It's my dad, audience. And I was just like, I got it by myself because it's on Disney Plus and no one would ever want to watch this with me. But there were so many times there were ADR things like that. Yeah, his dad gets kidnapped, and then he has like this thing, or he thinks he can get this thing, or he thinks he has this thing, so he kidnaps a fairy that shows up, and the fairies are all going to come, and he has this master plan that what's his name? Something Diggums? Oh, Mulch Diggums. Sorry. Mulch Diggums, played by Josh Gad. He knows a Mulch Diggums, or all dwarves do this in this, whatever, will like basically do this and like, put sand, unhinge his jaw, put sand in his mouth, shoot sand out his butt, and then suddenly they'll like get this magical thing. I'm not going to say this movie is very memorable, but that scene was, and to my memory of seeing this movie, that was pretty much the crux of the whole movie, was watching Josh Gad do that gross shit. It was like, I think that was pretty much the, without that scene, the movie wouldn't make any sense, or would have no reason to exist, or have no reason to talk about, because the rest of it is not as funny or as interesting as that. But he has this whole master plan. He's supposed to be this master, kind of really smart kid, which doesn't come across because he hasn't played very well. I don't understand why they cast this kid who's Ferdia Shaw, who's the grandson of Robert Shaw. I wish they'd find someone who was like a compelling kid who wanted to watch on screen. The girl who plays the elf that he kidnaps, she was actually cool. You could see something from her. Her name, Laura McDonnell. But so many performances were clearly cut up to ribbons. This movie's very cut up all over the place, and you can tell the director's not into it. To me, it just feels very standard in being a YA adaptation. It reminds me of stuff like kind of a better job that Wes Ball did on the Maze Runner movies, because he at least understood like the limitations of this genre, and this film doesn't. It's relying on it. And relying on the YA genre doesn't work for any movie. I don't know why studios and directors think they can do it, but since Kenneth Branagh is sort of just a work for hire and clearly doesn't care that much about how he's adapting, and he just is like, I'm adapting it, this is a movie you'll see, hopefully. It really doesn't transcend that in the most blandest way humanly possible. I think a lot of people will try to excuse this movie or overly destroy it. But I will say it's honestly not worth it. This movie is not interesting enough to even talk about. I'm having hard trouble filling material with it because like there's a guy named Butler you can't call Butler, but he's a butler. And then there's characters introduced that don't matter because clearly they cut this down. I've heard rumors they considered editing this to be a mini-series, which sounds horrible, but maybe I wouldn't have seen it, so that might have been better. I've also heard that Disney is considering this a TV movie for consideration for the Emmys and not as an actual theatrical film, because you can do that with streaming, which is interesting. I don't know if that's true or not. This is just kind of the kind of Hollywood movie that gets forgotten. That's what Artemis Fowl is. It's not interesting, it's not thought-provoking, and it's done by people who don't give a shit. It was fixed by a studio who knew this wasn't going to be what they wanted it to be after it was in development since the early 2000s, when it probably should have come out then, but it didn't, and didn't get made then. And then a director who was just doing it to work for hire, and then having actors like Josh Gad, who's been doing an interview the whole time, like kind of explaining it, and has this like raspy voice, like, oh, you don't understand, Artemis. And then you have Judi Dench, who's also in it as like a police chief elf person, going like, top of the morning, and then they talk. They have a scene where they talk together in their raspy voices, which is, I think, the peak comedy I've seen It's peak. It's pretty much, that's like the peak comedy of the whole movie. I don't know. There's sometimes I'm like, is Kenneth Branagh fucking with me, or is he this stupid? And I was like, I don't think he's smart enough to be fucking with me. So, and it's just them like, and she's like, I'm Mulch Diggums, and she's like, I'm an elf police chief, and it's so horrible. And I don't understand why people take the fairy and mystical worlds and try to like blockbuster and action movie it up, when that's clearly like not a thing that has worked in any of these movies that they keep insisting on making. Like, oh my god, like even Onward, it doesn't really work, and that's maybe the best one. Like, please stop making these kind of movies. It is just horrible. This movie is not good. It is not worthy of discussion. It's not bad enough. It's just watching Mulch Diggums, played by Josh Gad, do that thing. That's the scene we want. That's all you need to see. You've seen it. That was the peak of culture for the hour I watched this, maybe. And that's the only notable or interesting thing about that. I don't need to play clips of this movie. I can just keep playing Mulch Diggums, keep eating the sand, shooting it out his butt. That's all you need to know. And that's the best this movie ever gets, is a really bad fart poop joke. And it's not even as bad as Dolittle. So it sort of fails on so many levels. It can't even fail against... It can't even fail spectacularly against another studio edited and cut up kind of failure. It even fails in being a notable one of those. It just deserves to be on Disney Plus and goes further and further down the algorithm of whatever that is. I actually don't even like looking at it when it's on the banner of Disney Plus. When I open that streaming service, I'm ashamed of it. I'm ashamed of that movie. I'm ashamed of everything. I'm not ashamed of Mulch Diggums and that amazing clip. Everything else, though, just, this was one of those YA adaptations where someone asks you, why did you see it? And you're like, I don't know, man. I don't know. Mulch Diggums. So if you have seen Artemis Fowl and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.